If you love crowd control, red crits, and invulnerability, then you will love Nyx after her light rework. I will admit I have barely played Nyx before her rework, but I do remember how good her crowd control was. After the rework, she is definitely in a better place and she feels a lot better to play. In this video, we will go over how you can build the ultimate crowd control machine and also enjoy some of those juicy red crits depending on your builds. So without wasting your time, let's dive straight into it. Firstly, let's talk about Nyx's passive. Her passive now gains 40% critical chance on her primary and secondary weapons per confused enemy within affinity range, which is 50 meters, capping at 200%. This is mainly enemies affected by radiation, and it will be from a maximum of 5 enemies. Her first ability is called Mind Control. Nyx will seize control of a target's mind, making them fight for you. When you take control of an enemy, it will become invulnerable to damage and status effects from all sources. During this invulnerability stage, you can shoot the target to basically charge it up with a damage multiplier on the bottom right, essentially juicing up your new friend to destroy all nearby enemies with a huge damage multiplier. Although, after the damage multiplier is done, the damage is still not that crazy. Your ally will deal radiation damage against enemies. For this, I would highly recommend going for Eximus units, as you can scale their damage and you can also make use of their abilities while armor stripping other enemies to let your new ally deal even more damage through their horrible Eximus abilities. Mind Control has an augment called Mind Freak, which will increase the damage of the controlled target by 1000%, and it will also gain 25% attack and movement speed. This is up to you. If you really like Mind Control, then by all means use this augment. Her second ability is called Psychic Bolts. Psychic Bolts is a stacked ability. Cast out bolts that will seek out nearby enemies in your line of sight. It will stun them and strip them of their armor. But if you hit an enemy with overguard, it will steal some of their overguard and give it to you. And if you hit an enemy with shields, it will steal a portion of their shields and give it to you, which will bleed over into overshields. After the rework, when an enemy dies that is affected by the bolt, it will then spit out 2 more and spread to unaffected enemies. In my opinion, this slight change has made her second a lot better, but it's not like, let's say, Terrify level and so on of armor stripping. It's just basically a better shuriken armor strip from Ash, essentially. And this also makes Nyx a bit more tanky if you are not living in your fort the whole time, which we will go over in a moment. Psychic Bolts has an augment called Pacifying Bolts. Throw an additional 3 bolts and will stun enemies that are struck while inflicting radiation on them. If you really like her bolts and want to utilize it as a shield gating ability and more, this is a very nice augment and I would highly suggest running this, and it will also proc your passive to keep up the extra crit, which is very nice. Her third ability is called Chaos. Now, I may not have played Nyx much, but when I did, there was one ability that I remembered, and it's Chaos, and that's because of its insane crowd control. I really like crowd control, and Chaos just does it perfectly. Cast a Psychic Pulse that disorientates enemies in a big radius, forcing them to turn to each other. After the rework, it will now apply 10 radiation procs to the affected enemies. Chaos will help build up your passive, allowing you to get that extra crit chance. This is honestly an elite crowd control ability that is just really good for missions like interception, excavation, or mobile defense, and so on. Chaos has an augment called Chaos Sphere. Create a ring around you when you cast Chaos, and the range will last for 50% of the ability duration and will shrink over time. I just don't understand the point of this augment. There's literally no need for it in my honest opinion. That's just, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a need for it. Absorb is Nyx's fourth, which has been changed slightly. It is now a duration-based ability. Curl yourself up into a ball and absorb all incoming damage from enemies, as well as the damage dealt to confused enemies that have been affected by Chaos and Mind Control. When you build up a bunch of damage, you hold down the ability to send it out in a huge radial blast, doing damage to all nearby enemies, dealing magnetic damage. She will enter an invulnerability phase and gain a weapon damage boost proportional to the absorbed damage. The maximum amount of invulnerability duration will be 6 seconds. You will also gain 400% increased weapon damage at the max threshold. For Absorb to deal the crazy damage it shows, you will need to armor strip them prior to exploding the bubble, otherwise it's not that crazy. Nyx will be able to move and such, but you cannot use her abilities or weapons. This is what I don't like about Absorb. It's very limiting per se, and it just doesn't feel nice to use in general missions. However, the augment Assimilate completely changes this. With this augment, you can now move freely but at 50% speed. the absorb area is reduced by half and it will drain your energy per second. But this allows you to cast abilities, use weapons, and roll and so on, but you cannot parkour though. However, you can use certain melee movement sets to move quicker, like the Blind Justice Nakana Guiding Light combo, which is block and attack. Same with the Final Harbinger stance for sword and shields. Personally, unless you have Assimilate, you may as well not use her fourth. It's very disruptive, in my opinion. It doesn't fit. And that concludes the abilities. Before we go further, if I could ask you to take a second just to hit that like button, it goes a really long way for me. Thank you so much. How do we go about playing Nyx in general missions? I really like using Assimilate and I would really recommend that you run it in your build. You can run a double augment for her bolts and make use of pacifying bolts to spread your armor strip easier. That's up to you. When enemies start to spawn, cast mind control on the strongest target. Juice up your new ally by simply mag dumping into it. Then cast Chaos, your third ability, to distract and crowd control enemies. With Chaos alone, 90% of enemies will barely touch you. It is a very strong CC ability, probably one of the strongest in the game. This will also prime your passive, giving you free red crits if your weapon is built correctly and does a lot of crit damage. Then cast Psychic Bolt to armor strip enemies and also sustain your defenses a lot easier. Periodically cast Absorb if you have the augment on, and if you don't have it, cast at your own discretion. Be careful that Assimilate doesn't drain your energy, so make sure to have good enough energy sustain. If you really like mind control, then you can use the augment Mind Freak, but personally this is just meh. Even though mind control is better after the rework, I find it's only really good if you're controlling Eximus units for their abilities. I would personally subsume over Mind Freak in Steel Path, but as a new player, you're not going to have access to augments, so just run her base kit. You want to always keep up Chaos and keep recasting your bolts to keep yourself alive. Nyx is actually extremely tanky if you make use of her fourth and her bolts. She is really easy to play and it's not that complicated at all, especially with the invulnerability from her Absorb. Again, I want to reiterate, try and get Assimilate as fast as possible. It will completely change how she plays. But you don't have to always cast your fourth ability. For me, I like to cast it as an oh shit button when I'm about to die, or cast it periodically to gain its damage bonus and invulnerability. You don't have to permanently be in Absorb's form. You could use it however much you want. The crowd control from Chaos is actually more than enough to deter enemies. The only issue you will have is overguarded enemies, as they cannot be crowd controlled, so just be careful with them. But your armor stripping and a good weapon will make light work of them. Let's finally move on to how we go about modding Nyx. Her abilities scale very well with range. Range is extremely good with her. Good duration and a little bit of strength, as you only need 125% strength to full defense strip with her bolts. So for a new player who has received a free Nyx or has farmed their Nyx Prime, you can mod for Intensify, Flow, Stretch, and Continuity. That's all you need, a simple 4-mod build. Then when you get further, add extra mods like Equilibrium, Augur Reach, Streamline, and then her Augment Assimilate. For the Aura slot, anything you have available. And this right here is the beginner setup, a comfortable one that is more than enough for Star Chart. Then when we transition into Steel Path, we keep Equilibrium, Flow, Stretch, Augur Reach, Continuity, and then we add Rolling Guard and Umbral Intensify, and then we use any aura we see fit. I generally go for Brief Respite, it's just my go-to. And for the arcanes, this is flexible to what you like. I would go for efficiency and a flexible arcane to pick up what you need for the build. This right here is a really nice Steel Path setup that's balanced and offers everything that you need. You can change around the build to your liking and playstyle. If you prefer more range or duration, then by all means go for that. I do want to add that in my Steel Path build, I did add Rolling Guard, and that's because I love to have an insurance policy no matter how many defenses your frame has. So by all means, if you feel like there is no way you die with her fourth ability, then you can drop Rolling Guard and go for another stat. Before we go further into the Helminth sections, I do want to talk about a method of making Nyx feel so much better. You see, when you use Assimilate and cast Absorb, you can move more freely, but it still feels slow. You can only run, roll, and jump. You already know what I'm about to tell you. Parkour velocity, my favorite mechanic in this game. Yes, I love parkour velocity, and this is the first time that it's actually needed, in my opinion, for a frame. Increasing your parkour velocity will make Nyx feel so much better and quicker when using Assimilate. Now we can do this by doing the following, using either Arcane Agility or Arcane Consequence on her. I much prefer Consequence as it's way more consistent to gain that extra 60% parkour velocity. 60% will make her feel a lot better. But if that's not enough for you, you can make use of Mobilize in your Exodus slot. And of course, these shiny little crystals over here, Archon Shards. Amber Shards can be used to increase your parkour velocity even further. Oh, and if that's not enough and you are a total addict like me, how about using the Praedos as a utility melee for that extra 30%? For the cherry on top, you can make use of Amalgam Barrel Diffusion on your secondary as well to increase your roll speed. And well, after all this added stuff, you essentially get this. Okay, you don't need all this parkour velocity, only an addict would use this type of thing, but you can choose whatever tickles your fancy to increase to the amount that you like. This will make Nyx feel a lot better in your missions. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about the Helminth Setups. For me personally, Nyx's first ability is the Subsume slot. While Mind Control sounds cool and seems cool in theory, it's still kinda mid. The only use case for me is focusing on Eximus units, but I will say I know there are some people who really don't like her fourth ability even with Assimilate, which is okay, and the reason I say this is because Nyx can actually survive more than enough with just Chaos and her bolts alone. So if you do want to subsume her fourth, by all means you can go for that. Otherwise, for all the subsumes, you can subsume over her first ability, Mind Control. For the first Helminth build, I have a very stupid build right here. I mean, Nyx technically is a crowd control queen, right? But like, there's never enough crowd control, let's be real. Am I right? So we subsume silence onto her first ability. Yes, it is overkill, I am aware. But hey, you silence Eximus units and further stun enemies, even more. This is an overkill crowd control setup. And this is what the build will look like. Is it ideal? Of course not. Is it a cool idea that pretty much means nothing will touch you? Absolutely. But I will one-up this build as well. We can subsume Shooting Gallery, which is Mace's subsume, over our first and make use of the Augment Muzzle Flash. Once again, overkill on the crowd control. What can I say? I like crowd control, okay? Just let me be. But yes, if you want to use this, then by all means go for it. You probably will never die. Up next, we have an amazing synergy with Wrathful Advance. Wrathful Advance allows you to teleport to enemies and perform a heavy melee attack, but it also allows you to freely teleport by holding down the ability. This is really nice to use while in Assimilate to traverse the map as you see fit, and you can essentially blink anywhere you want. I would recommend this if you don't like the clunky playstyle of her fourth. Next up, we have our red crit weapons platform. Well, I say red crit, but it does depend on the weapon's crit chance after all and how you build it. It's a raw combat discipline and arcane avenger setup. We subsume raw over our first, we build for a bit more strength. If you can sustain your energy, then you can drop energize and run molt augmented to gain more strength. I did opt for a dual augment playstyle, but this is personal preference. By all means, drop pacifying bolts and go for more strength so your raw scales even more. This right here is a godly weapons platform that offers you everything you need. Armor stripping, raw, red crits, and invulnerability. What more could you ask for in a frame? For the other subsume suggestions, I would say Eclipse, Nourish for Viral, or Fractured Blast if you're struggling for energy sustain. And that pretty much concludes all of the Helminth setups. When it comes to the Archon Shards for Nyx, I would highly suggest going for 1 or 2 casting speed shards. It makes a huge difference for her fourth. And then of course, be like me who commits to a full parkour velocity demon setup. Otherwise, use whichever shards you see fit. This is always subjective to everyone, so it really depends on what you want to go for. Nyx definitely feels ironed out after her rework. I knew she was somewhat decent before, but after trying her out and testing her for this video, I can confidently say that she has so many tools to be one of the tankiest frames in this game. And I know many people overlook her, but I would really suggest sinking some form into her and giving her a try. I don't think that you'll be disappointed at all. Also, let me know what your thoughts are on Warframe 1999 so far. Do you think it's a good update overall? And I've just released a Saito 9 guide if you would like to go and check that one out. As always, a massive thank you to all of our amazing channel members and a special thank you to Momokia, Darwin, Fish, Joshua, Caden, Shakira, Ayrton Yard, Tythrax, and Noob Phoenix. You guys are absolutely amazing. I appreciate your support so much. Alright, enjoy Never Dying with Nyx. Bye!